Wonderful. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to JWA's Quarantine Book Talks. I'm Judith Rosenbaum of the Jewish Women's Archive. Really glad to be back with you tonight for the third session of our winter series. As I said, please say hello in the chat box. We'd love to know who's with us. Make sure that you're chatting to everyone so we can all see it. Also, throughout our conversation tonight, please drop your questions in the chat and I will bring them into our discussion. We're so glad that we have this opportunity to continue to gather together from all around the world for meaningful conversation and learning. And I want to thank Jewish Live for their partnership in streaming for us. Before I introduce our featured author for this evening, I wanted to say a few words about JWA for anyone who's new. We are a digital archive at jwa.org that expands the Jewish narrative by documenting and sharing Jewish women's stories. We uncover a more diverse narrative because we believe that hearing a more diverse story helps us understand the world we live in and create a better future. And this is just one part of the work that we do, talking to writers and talking about art and culture. We do so much more. I hope you'll check out jwa.org to explore the full range of programs and resources that we offer. I am so delighted to welcome Rabbi Haviva Ner-David to JWA this evening. In 2006, Haviva became the first woman to publicly receive Orthodox rabbinic ordination, only to leave Orthodoxy and call herself a post-denominational rabbi. And then 10 years later, she received interfaith ordination from the One Spirit Interfaith Interspiritual Seminary. And she now goes by post-denominational interspiritual rabbi. We'll get to hear about that later. Haviva has an MFA in creative writing, and she writes both fiction and nonfiction. And we'll get to hear about two different books tonight. This is a double feature in some ways. She's also the author of 3 spiritual journey memoirs, a novel, short stories, essays. She has a blog on Times of Israel. She writes scholarly articles. There's much to explore in her work. Haviva is also the founding rabbi of Shemaya, a mikvah for mind, body, and soul, where she officiates and helps create on-site personalized immersion ritual ceremonies and facilitates group mikvah workshops. And her doctorate from Bar Ilan University is on the subject of mikvah. She also works as a spiritual companion, and we'll hear more about that later too. Haviva and her family live on Kibbutz Hanaton in the Lower Galilee, which means, for those of you who can do the math, that right now it's 3 a.m. for her. So we give her huge props for being with us, even in the middle of the night. Haviva also lives with FSHD, a form of muscular dystrophy, which she calls one of her biggest teachers. So welcome, Haviva. We're so excited to have this opportunity to discuss both your new novel and your new memoir tonight.
Thank you. Okay. You hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Great. So I think we're going to start by talking about the novel, Hope Valley. So tell us a little bit about, this is your first novel. Tell us how you decided to write this novel and why you chose, what inspired it and why you chose to write this story.
Okay. Should I say a couple of sentences about the novel first?
Yeah, sure. You can describe it in the course of explaining how you came to it.
Okay. So this is the novel, Hope Valley. It's about the friendship between 2 Israeli women, one Palestinian and one Jewish. And it takes place during the summer of 2000, which is, it was the summer before the outbreak of the Second Intifada. So it was a time when things were really heating up in Israel. And there's a backstory in 1948 that's told through a diary that was written by the father of the Palestinian woman. So that's the book. It's told from the shifting points of view of Ruby, who's the Palestinian woman. Her name is Rabia, and Ruby is the name that she goes by, the nickname. And Tikva, who's the Jewish Israeli woman. So the points of view shift. And the 2 women meet in the valley that's between, here, I'll show you on the cover. There's the valley, which is Hope Valley. And one woman lives on one side and one woman lives on the other, and they meet in the valley one day. So that's Hope Valley. Now, what inspired me to write it is, first of all, well, one thing I wanted to explore was the idea of a woman who moves to Israel from the United States, from a Zionist ideology like I did. I was born in New York and I moved to Israel in my 20s. So Tikva moves to Israel actually right out of high school, which is not what I did. No, sorry, I thought no children were awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, but that's not the case.
You can never know.
You can never know. Okay. I'm going to move to a different room in a second, but okay. So so one thing that inspired me was that I really wanted to explore this idea of a woman who moves to Israel out of Zionist ideology. And then when she gets to Israel, she starts to realize, not right away, it takes a while, but she starts to realize that she was only told part of the truth of the story of how the state was established. And what does she do with that information when she discovers this? So I wanted to explore that, and I didn't know of any other novels that had a protagonist who has that issue. So that was one thing I wanted to explore. Another was, because I live here in the Galilee, and I have a lot of friends who are Palestinian, and I've heard their stories. And because I'm part of something called the narrative sharing group, where every month one person tells their story, and everyone's just supposed to sit and listen without judgment, and only can ask questions, but it's not a dialogue group, it's not a debate group. And so I've heard a lot of stories over the years, and I felt like I really wanted to, because I have access to these stories, I wanted to share some of this information and some of the emotions around it as well, and to be able to share it with people who don't have the access to it. So those were two things that motivated me to write the book. And there's also a story. So one day I was walking with my dog in the valley between where I live on a kibbutz called Hanaton, like you said. And we're there is a valley between us and the Bedouin village that's across the valley. And one day I was walking my dog in the valley, and I saw a shepherd that I would usually see there. His name is Hussein. I still see him. And that day, usually I just see him and his flocks and I say hello. But this time there was a woman with him, and I went over and he introduced me, and it was his wife. And she asked me how old I was, and I told her, which then was this book. Let's see, it was at least, it was about 8 years ago that this story happened. And she asked me how old I was, and I told her. And she said, "Oh, you're the same age that my daughter was." And she said her daughter had died of breast cancer. And so, then she started crying, and we hugged, and this was before COVID. And, and she told me about her daughter. And then when I was, afterward, I left. And as I was walking home, I was thinking, wow, it really would have been amazing if I had met her daughter, because we were the same age. And also, so she had breast cancer, and I have the FSHD, the muscular disease that you mentioned before. And I was thinking, oh, this is something that we could have bonded over. We could have talked about this and connected over it. And so as I was walking home, I was thinking that would have been really amazing. And then this idea, the kernel of the idea of the story came to me. And then it was just, my imagination kind of took off, and I started to imagine all of this. And I'm going to move to the other room, but while you're asking this question, that's right.
So I guess my next question is about how you chose to create the characters of Tikva and Ruby, and particularly the choice to tell the story from these multiple points of view. The main 2 points of view are Tikva and Ruby, and then, as you said, you also have Ruby's father. There's a diary with flashbacks that helps tell the story of the village in 1948 as well. So what was your kind of approach to telling the story in that way? And I guess also, what was your research process? The second part of that is, what was your research process in, building those characters and building the stories of the villages and the moshav, because you base them on imaginary, but obviously based on real life stories.
Okay, so first of all, the originally the novel was written from only Tikva's point of view. So I was writing, as I said, I wanted to explore this idea of this woman who gets this information and what does she do with it. And so that was the original book. And I felt like something was missing. And it took a while. It took actually a couple of years of revision to get the courage to write from the shifting points of view. And as soon as I gave myself the liberty to try it, at least, I said, oh, you might as well just try it. And I started to write from Ruby's point of view, from the Palestinian woman's point of view. And that was, I feel, when the book really took off and really took on the life that it needed to have. Mm. And I think it was really important that I did this. Now, looking back, I understand why that was so important, because really you can't tell this story just from one point of view. And so that's part of it. That's a big message of the book, is that we have these two narratives and we need to have both narratives. We need to be able to hold both narratives. And that's just, you really can't tell the story of 1948 without hearing both stories. And because that's such an important message of the book, it's just natural that it be told from the two women's point of view. So that was about the points of view. In terms of the other question you asked about the research, right? And the different villages, yeah. So the villages there, I wanted to, it's all, it's fiction. The kibbutz is a fiction, the moshav is fiction, all the different places are fictional except the cities. The cities I kept, Haifa, Fula, Nazareth, those are all the cities. But the villages, I wanted to be able to have more liberty to play with it, to dramatize things, to create more conflict. And also it was important to me to not be like pointing fingers at certain places, because these are places that exist today. And and so it was more the ideas and not to make, it wasn't a history book, but it is all based on real things that happened. I just sometimes combined events, or as I said, for drama, maybe certain timings or things like that. But it is all based on real things that happened, and it's all plausible things that also could happen or could have happened. And the research I did was, a lot of it was hearing testimony, as I said. So people, friends of mine, if someone whose family lived in a village that was destroyed, and they would take me to the site of the place and say, this is where this house was, this is where, my grandfather told me about this, so a lot of it was in that way, as I said, information that I felt like I wanted to share that you wouldn't necessarily get even from a history book or from looking on the internet, because some of it also was very heartfelt, and people would tell me stories or what it felt like to live, let's say, in Nazareth and be able to see the site of where their village once was, and the whole family either escaped to Lebanon or Syria or to Nazareth. A lot of people did go to Nazareth in my area where I live. Mm-hmm. So that it was research in that way, testimonial, and then also history. I read books and looked on the internet too, and just kind of, and weaved it all together with part history, part fiction.
One of the things that I think is really striking in the book is that, I was going to say that Tikva starts out, the Jewish character starts out really not knowing much about the Nakba, which is the Palestinian name for what Jewish Israelis called the War of Independence.
Mhm.
And she doesn't know much about the history of the Arab villages and the Palestinians around her. And I think it's also true, though maybe to a lesser extent, which makes sense because they're the not the people in power there. But Ruby also doesn't know very much about the Jewish stories of her Jewish neighbors either. And I'm curious how much that reflected both your own experience and the experience of people around you that you witnessed in terms of that kind of lack of knowledge.
Knowledge, yeah. So part of the reason why I wrote the book too is because, as I said, I had only part of the story. So that is autobiographical in that way. And some of it was just about not knowing all the details, or where certain villages were, or how many villages there were. I mean, that was a big issue too, was that, yeah, I knew that there had been Palestinians here and that some of them were refugees, but really like living here and then finding out that so many of the places around where I live, there was once an Arab village there, and that there is no sign that says that. And some of these, these are places where I think even some of the people who live there now don't know the extent of the history. So that was part of it. But again, it's for dramatic effect. So I made Tikva is a little, more naive than I was, who knows a little less, and that's part of writing fiction, is to try to create more conflict and more tension. When the two women meet, like, for example, in my first draft, they were friends right away. And then I realized that, in fiction, you can't do that. You can't have them meet and become best friends, in the second chapter. You have to have it has to work up and lead up to it. And first they don't get along, and then there's suspicion, and there's, and I'm closing the door. My daughter has a bagel business and she woke up early to make bagels. So, okay. Wow. And I didn't realize. Okay, so okay, so how much don't people know? So, and I know even now, like, people who read my book who live here say to me that by reading my book, they discovered all this that they didn't know. So I know, for sure that's true. And as I said, not to the extent maybe that, but some people, yes, to the extent. Me, I just happen to actually know more, I think, than most people. And another issue too is that there are some things that are really only coming out now. Like, I didn't realize how much of it was kind of a plan, and that's something that's coming out a lot more in documentary films, in articles, in the newspaper. People are starting to learn that there was really like a plan to create a Jewish majority in the country, even to the at the expense of people who were living here, to either to scare them out of the village and then say they can't come back, things like that they definitely didn't teach me growing up, and that's a big part of the book. But I want to say that it is from both women's points of view, and so there's learning that Tikva has to do, and there's learning that Ruby has to do as well, and she also grows as a character. And it's that's what's so important, is that there's the two narratives. I'm not just trying to show the Palestinian side. There's the Jewish story as well, the Zionist narrative.
And there's multiple narratives, because one of the things that I think is interesting is that you see in Ruby's family that actually in the story, the part of the story from 48, that the siblings in her family, her father and her siblings, don't necessarily agree with one another, and they don't necessarily agree with other people in the village about what the right way is. And much of that has gotten flattened historically too, as if there was a Palestinian perspective and a Jewish perspective, when of course we know that there were many different visions of what would be best or what might work. I felt like one of the things that came through very powerfully in your book is both the kind of fear and kind of anxiety people have about encountering a narrative that they're unfamiliar with and that might contradict what they've been told, and also the incredible healing that can come about when someone actually hears you and believes you and like gives recognition to your your version of the truth. And one of the things that I, in my opportunities to talk to Palestinians, one of the things that I think was most powerful in my experience was hearing so many Palestinians say that the main thing that they would need to get to peace was acknowledgement of what had happened to them and their families and the loss that they had experienced. And that almost more than anything that had to happen in the present day was like the bulk of the work that needed to be done. And I think we kind of lose sight of that. But, you know, as someone who works in history and as someone who loves fiction also, and, you know, sort of thinking about how we can use story to remind people of the power of story to heal, basically.
Yeah, there's that's a big theme in the book, is as you know, of this idea of acknowledging the trauma and the pain on both sides. So not just the Palestinians, but also Tikva. You know, she also needs to have Ruby acknowledge not only the Shoah, not only the Holocaust, but there's also her husband Alon. It has post-traumatic stress disorder from the Lebanon War. There's a lot of trauma in the book, and there's trauma and there's also, this is leading up to the Intifada, and the Intifada breaks out at, you know, toward the end of the book. And so there's all of that. There's the current trauma, there's the past trauma. One thing in the book that's also interesting, you know, and I think that you noticed was how the trauma repeats itself, and there's these cycles of trauma. So first of all, the book came out in April, and it was right before the war that we just had here in May, and I was doing a lot of book talks around that time too. And you have the 1948 backstory in the book, and there's this writing that goes on then, and then you have 2000, which is the front story, and there's the same cycles of violence going on. And I was sitting in my room, you know, doing book talks and having the same violence going on. And so there were these like 3 layers. And there's one theme in the book of where I think Ruby even says about a spiral, so that, you know, you have these, you know, history can keep repeating itself, and it does. And you can like keep going around in a circle, and you're just going around in a circle, or you can have a spiral, which you're you're making like a little bit of an improvement, you know, like a tikkun, a corrective, you know, every time a little bit, you know, until hopefully you get to some kind of redemption. And that's a big part of the book too, is that we're talking about all this trauma and pain and suffering, but the book is really, it's called Hope Valley, and it's a hopeful book, really, and it's about human connection and how that can be such a healing element, and it can bring redemption. And the 2 women, they're both ill, you know, in the book. So Tikva, she has multiple sclerosis. She doesn't have muscular dystrophy, which is what I have. And one of the reasons is this is fiction, and I was trying to, it's not me in the book, she's a different woman, and I was trying to distance myself from her so that I could let her become herself. And you have Ruby, who has breast cancer. So I did do that in the book. I have there, she's like the woman, the daughter who I didn't meet. And the 2 women connect over this, the fact that they both are dealing with illness. So that is a big theme in the book as well. And I'm trying to remember why I was saying that, but yeah, so there's this redemptive quality in the book, and this hopeful quality of the fact that they can connect, yes, over, you know, over these human, like really basic human issues. And that's really what it's all about, is, as you said, acknowledging each other's pain and suffering, and realizing we're all really human, and all of the things that divide us, you know, it's more about the things that can connect us. And that's what I think will bring the peace that we're looking for, I hope. Yeah.
It was also interesting to see the ways that you were kind of exploring the power of story and trauma and healing, both on this collective level of like the story of a people or a nation, and on the individual level in terms of these specific women and what they were struggling with in their own lives, whether it was, you know, who they were supposed to be, and they're both also artists, and their kind of artistic journeys, or their illness, and kind of the parallels of that, you know, sort of the idiosyncratic individuals and the larger collective lens also.
Yeah, and there's so many things that I hope that people will read the book, because there's so many things we didn't talk about. As I'm thinking about it, and there's the dog and there's the tree. There's like so much, there's so much in this book that's not so thick.
Do you want to read a little scene for us just to give us a taste before we move on to talking about the memoir?
Sure. Okay. So this is a scene, I'm not going to read the whole scene, just toward the end of it, where the two women, they meet a lot in the valley, and that's where they meet originally, and then they go there, and there's the tree is in the valley. This is the tree of hope, and it has three trunks. There's these amazing olive trees where I live, where they're ancient, and the one in this book is 2,000 years old, just to the time of Jesus. And the legend has it that Jesus's father planted the tree, and it has they're these amazing trees. They have like a lot of trunks, and so this one is 3 trunks, which is the 3 Abrahamic religions, and they all come together like this canopy where people sit under the tree. And so Tikva and Ruby tend to meet under there, and then there's this other couple in the backstory who meet under the tree as well. That's Ruby's father, Jamal, and another woman that you'll read about when you read the book. So, I mean, you have already, but other people. Okay, so here, this scene, Tikva and Ruby they meet, and as I said, both women are ill, but Tikva doesn't tell Ruby that she has multiple sclerosis until this point in the book. And so this is right after she tells her. So, okay. And then, there's so much. And what I also didn't say, which was really important, is that Ruby's father's diary, the one that I said that the backstory is told through. So that diary is in the house. Okay, this I have to tell them. Okay. This is a big part of the book, which is that, and you find this out right away, which is that Tikva is living in the house where Ruby's father grew up and where he had kept this diary. And when his village was destroyed in 1948, he left the diary in the house, thinking he was going to come back, which is the story of most of the cases with these villages, where the villagers were told that they had to leave, but they thought they were going to be able to come back. So he thought he'd be able to come back, and he left the diary in the house. And so Ruby, right in the first scene of the whole book, the opening of the book, she's looking for this diary. She comes with a flashlight to look for the diary, and Tikva is in the house. And anyway, so that's a big part of the book, is this whole issue with the diary, and she's trying to find the diary. And the reason why Ruby befriends Tikva in the first place is not because she wants to be her friend, really, it's because she wants to be able to get in the house and find the diary. But then they slowly become friends. Okay, so this is where Tikva has told Ruby that she has multiple sclerosis. Okay. Tikva looked wistful. I spent my best childhood times at the beach. I also lived in Tel Aviv for years before coming to Galilee. When we first moved here, I didn't miss it so much. I had my art and the cabins. Talia was still at home, that's her daughter. But now she's grown and my art is gone. I feel blocked. I used to see a picture in my head that I needed to get down on canvas. It was like I was channeling a vision that needed to become an image for others to see. But it's been so long since I've had that ability. I don't know how to get it back. Ruby remembered one of her most powerful lessons from the ashram. Did you try surrendering? She too could use a dose of that now. Surrendering? It's when you stop trying to swim against the current and just let it carry you instead. It's about learning to surrender to the flow instead of trying to grab onto rocks along the way. Ruby lifted a stone from the ground, tossed it up, and caught it. Because in the end, you won't be able to hold on forever. Rocks are slippery, and no one has endless strength. Nothing is permanent. Everything is constantly in flux, even if we don't realize it or want to admit it. Even a rock gets worn away by water eventually. Tikva looked like she was considering Ruby's suggestion. It's a powerful idea, but I can't make myself surrender. I have to feel it somehow. When I'm in the water, I feel something surrounding me, holding me, lifting me, and I'm part of its vastness. A muezzin chorus sounded from the surrounding villages. Allahu Akbar. Ruby looked at Tikva. They're calling for prayer. I have not prostrated myself in so many years, but I've been thinking about giving it another try. And this might be just what you need now too, an embodied practice. Sufis explain the prostration pose as a physical surrender to Allah, to the beloved, to what is, with a capital W and a capital I. Sufis? Muslim mystics, kind of like your Kabbalists. And it's not particularist, it's like Buddhism in that way. There was a woman, Sufi mystic and poet with a name like mine, except pronounced a bit differently, Rabia Basri. My father told me he had her in mind when he and my mother chose my name. Ruby removed the blue headscarf she had tied on that morning, spread it out on the dirt, and knelt down on the puddle-like makeshift prayer rug. She could see Tikva was trying not to stare at her bald head, which shocked Ruby too, as much as the sight of herself with a headscarf did. She was no shaved-headed Buddhist monk, would not even call herself a Buddhist at all. She felt no need to limit herself with a label, but she did find much wisdom there. Ruby patted the ground, motioning for Tikva to join her. Tikva knelt beside Ruby. They both looked out at the view of Mount Sapir and at the reservoir below. Two birds were circling above, a pair of Bonelli's eagles, a rare sighting. Her father said seeing even one was a good omen, but a pair could be the harbinger of miracles. Then again came the call, Allahu Akbar. Ruby closed her eyes and reached to the sky. Slowly, she brought her head down to the earth and spread her arms out before her. She held that position for a few quiet moments before straightening and reaching her arms up again. A perfect combination of the prostration posture she had watched her father do 5 times a day and child's pose from her later years of practicing yoga and meditation. This feels just right. Think about letting go into the flow. Ruby looked around and started to sing, improvising as she went along. Picture yourself in a boat on a river with cedar, pine trees, and sapphire skies. The muezzin calls you, you answer by bowing. She looked into Tikva's eyes, a woman with hazel cat eyes. Tikva in the flow with Ruby, Tikva in the flow with Ruby. She took a breath. Why don't you try it, she added, still in the tune of the adapted Beatles song. Very cute, Tikva laughed. Then Ruby laughed. Then they both became silent when the muezzin called again. Just try it, Ruby said. I don't know. Jews bow like that only on Yom Kippur. It's one of the only times Alon and I go to synagogue. I guess that's the Jewish day of surrender. Yes, exactly. Surrendering to life or God. It's a human need. If we want to prevent our own suffering, it's not limited to Buddhism or Islam. Tikva looked out at the view in thought. I guess Yom Kippur is coming up, and doing the posture out here does speak to me more than doing it inside the synagogue, closed in by walls, surrounded by other people. Well, you're welcome to join me if you want. Ruby lifted her arms, reaching up to the sapphire sky. Sapir, Yakut al-Jalil. Even when the village itself was gone, even with all the pain that was buried beneath these pine trees, the sky remained so purely blue. The next time the muezzin called, Ruby folded Tikva's hands in hers, and she felt no resistance. Allahu Akbar. God is the most great. God is the most vast. God is all that is. She closed her eyes and asked for the strength to surrender. A strong, warm wind blew along her scalp and on her cheeks. She took a deep breath, letting the scent of life fill her nostrils. Life that would be in this very same spot long after both she and Tikva and also Cain, or God, Cain is the dog. Even the tree of hope would not last forever, but the flow would continue. Ruby lowered her face to the ground, Tikva's hand still warm in hers. Her eyes were closed, but she knew Tikva was bowing along with her. She felt the energy of her own surrender flowing from her heart and through her arm, her hands, the tips of her fingers into Tikva's fingers, her hand, her arm, and up into her heart. And for those few long minutes, there was no separation. I feel it, Ruby, Tikva whispered. I feel one with the flow. Thank you. So yeah, I hope you understood, because as I was reading it, I realized there are things that we didn't explain, like the name
I think
of
it's
the
fine,
village.
and it will
I
whet
guess
people.
you get the idea.
Yes, and it will whet people's appetite to uncover the secrets. Thank you for sharing that. And it's a great transition point, because you're talking about Tikva letting go and not resisting the current. And of course, your memoir is called Dreaming Against the Current. So there's clearly some common themes, and you write about surrender quite a bit also in the memoir. So you were writing these two books at the same time. What was it like to be writing fiction and memoir at the same time? And how, if at all, were the books kind of riffing off each other or related?
Yeah, okay. So this book, Dreaming Against the Current, this takes place during the 4 years that I was studying at the One Spirit Interfaith Interspiritual Seminary. And it, there's starts before that, that's when it takes place, but there's back flashbacks and all. So the overlap, and so I was writing them at the same time, and I don't think I knew right away that I was writing the memoir. I was writing the novel from before then even. And when I was in seminary, so I would, I'm a writer, and when I'm processing things, I write. So things were happening to me, and I had a file in the computer with different things that were going on, and a lot of dreams that I was having and the interpretations of them and all kinds of things. And that was a file on my computer, and it started to take shape as a book. It was mostly, it was more like snippets and segments. And so there are things now, like if I look at the novel, there are overlapping themes, as you said. There's the surrender. There's this frustration scene that I just read in the novel. There's actually a scene in my life that gave me, the inspiration for that, and it's in the memoir. There's a convent in the novel that is a combination of a few different, a monastery and a convent, but the actual convent is in the memoir. So there's definitely overlap, but I'd say that the memoir, it was real things that were happening in my life, and I couldn't play with it. I could shape things, I could figure out, the way I was going to tell the scene, but it's all things that really happen in the novel. I could just let the story take on a life of its own. I could play with it. I could dramatize things. I could combine things, and they're not the same story at all. But when you read them together, you can feel the influence, I guess, of things that were going on in my life and how they made it into the novel. So it's fun to see that, I think. Another thing I saw now that I was thinking about, that's definitely a theme throughout my life and makes it into all my books, is this seeker quality, So I think I'm definitely a seeker, and my two memoirs before this one also, it's and Tikva in the book, so she's seeking, like, what's the truth? What does she do with this information? And I think also that a theme in my life has been kind of questioning the stories I've been told, and not taking things for granted, and trying to find out, the bigger truth. And so that's a theme that goes through all my books, even the novel.
So this is your third memoir, and as I alluded to in the introduction, it's sort of your three different memoirs talk about your journey from how you became an Orthodox woman rabbi to your current, calling as an interspiritual minister. So tell us a little bit about, your path and what it's been like to write these 3 books and know that your story is out there in this kind of way.
Mm-hmm. So also I should just say, you said interspiritual minister, which I am, but what I call myself, is make sure I get all the things. Okay, a post-denominational interspiritual rabbi, slash minister, you could say, but I definitely, I go by rabbi, and I work as a rabbi, and but I can talk more about that. So I'd say, first of all, a lot of my story is about just kind of like broadening my perspective, as I think I also said before, so that I grew up Orthodox, and I went from, let's say, modern Orthodox growing up to becoming very involved in the Orthodox feminist movement. And I was the first woman to receive Orthodox smicha publicly. But then I left the Orthodox movement, and I called myself a post-denominational rabbi, because I didn't believe in, I didn't feel like I identified with one particular movement or denomination, and I wanted to just speak as myself and not represent any other denomination. So I went from, non-Orthodox, Orthodox feminist, post-denominational, and then deciding I wanted to explore interfaith and interspirituality. There's the story behind that as well. So I look at my life, kind of as like starting like this, and kind of opening and broadening, just as I'm seeing the bigger picture. So now I'm trying to remember what the question was. What is it like having all these different memoirs out there? So it's actually interesting, because my first one, Life on the Fringes, I have them here. The first one, Life on the Fringes. So I'm actually reading through it now, because it's not on Kindle. It came out in 2000, and I'm 50. I'm turning 53 in like 2 days. And so this, the 2000, that was like almost 25 years ago. And I'm reading through it now, because it's not on Kindle, and we're preparing it to go on to Kindle, my publisher. So I had to read through it. And it's quite amazing to read something that you wrote, like the story of your life when you were however old I was then, 20, whatever. And I recognize parts of myself in there, and then there are parts that I'm like, wow, I felt really differently then than I do today, which I think is okay. I think it's okay. I think it's good to evolve and to grow, but not everyone writes a memoir, not everyone writes 3 memoirs. So it's kind of a little bit of a strange position to be in, but I've thought about it. And I think that, first of all, it is an interesting thing to read the 3 and see how a person changes and evolves over time. But I also think that every step of the way of my journey was very legitimate, and I don't regret anything. So I'm happy if someone reads a memoir from a different stage in my life, and it speaks to them and inspires them or whatever. And so, as I see, it's I think it's all okay, but it is a bit, strange to read things that I wrote that I don't even remember necessarily having written. So
right, and you probably encounter people who feel that
in general,
who feel that they know a certain you from your book, and may feel very invested in that other earlier version of you that you've moved on from, but it may be a very important role model to someone who's in a different place than where you are now.
Yeah, and I definitely have encountered that, and I had to get used to saying, oh, you read the book, that was 2000, and now this is 2022, so do you want to know where I'm at now? And I've gotten used to it, and I'm careful to always say, when people come and whenever they invite me to speak or something, I'm always careful to say, do you realize I'm not the same person who wrote the book in 2000. This is where I'm at now.
And we have some questions from
and I want
the audience about, sort of, who are interested in a little more of your story of, first of all, how you became an Orthodox rabbi to begin with, and then the choice you've made to move in a different direction and pursue the interspiritual work.
Okay. And just before I answer that, I just wanted to say this was that the whole idea of people reading the book and identifying with certain stages of my life, that it does very much speak to one of the main things I do as a rabbi right now, aside from the mikvah, is that I am a spiritual director or a companion or a counselor. There's all different titles for it. So, and a whole big part of that is just holding space for people wherever they are, and just accompanying them on their journey. So I very much am trained to do that, and to respect anyone, and not only respect, to really celebrate who they are, where they are. So because also that's my training, it's not difficult for me to hear someone say, oh, I really identify with the person who wrote the book in 2000. And I'm like, wonderful, let's hear about her. And so it actually, it does work well with the work that I do. So about maybe I'll tell about then and what this is about and where I'm at now. So how did I get Orthodox ordination? So where to start? So as I said, I grew up Orthodox, and I wanted to become a rabbi, which is its whole story as well. And there were no places where a woman in the Orthodox movement could become a rabbi. Today, there are places where you can get, I don't know if they call it an ordination. Some women are calling themselves rabbis even. Back then they weren't. And I applied to Yeshiva University actually, and they didn't acknowledge my application. And I ended up studying at Drisha in New York, which had a program where you could study all the material that they studied at Yeshiva University, but you didn't get ordination at the end. And I did that, and then I moved to Israel, and I found a rabbi in Jerusalem, Aryeh Strakowski, who said he would give me his private ordination. He's an Orthodox rabbi. And I studied with him for 10 years, and I got my doctorate at Bar Ilan. And I wrote about mikveh, which is my pulpit, these days is a mikveh that I said that I run on the kibbutz, which is the only mikveh in Israel that's open to anyone who wants to use it. And as I do that, and I do my counseling at the mikveh too, and I create ceremonies with people for them. So that was that. And where I'm at now, so the thing that led me to this stage, and I'm skipping another one in between, is that in the summer of 2014, there was a different war. That summer, a different war with Gaza. And that summer, the country was very much divided, segregated. There were bombs falling, there were missiles falling. It was the same, I feel like deja vu. There were missiles falling here from Gaza, and we were bombing Gaza. And my son was going into the army. He was going to be a paratrooper. And it was a very scary time. And for me, thinking that he was going into the army then, and just seeing how we were fighting over this land, it seemed like religion was something that was causing the problem and dividing us. And as a rabbi, I felt like this is something that I needed to explore for myself. And where did I stand with all of this? And during that summer, the times that I really felt the most at peace was when I was in interfaith gatherings. And we would get together. Actually, one of the places we got together was this church in Ilabun, which is what one of the villages in Hope Valley is based on, partially. And we would get together and sing songs of peace, and with Palestinians and Jews. And that is how I felt, where I felt most at peace and comfortable. And I was on a book tour in New York that summer with this book, with Hannah's Voice, which is the one that comes between. I voiced this to someone and she said, "Oh, have you ever heard of the One Spirit Interfaith Interspiritual Seminary in New York?" And I said no. So I went to go visit it, and I ended up signing up for their interfaith interspiritual ministry program. And it's a program it's 2 years of study where you study about all the different major faiths, and it's a lot of inner work and taking on practices of different faiths and trying them on, and it was very opening for me. And I'd say that the main takeaway I got from those 2 years was that really all the faiths, even if there are all these things that are different about them, there's like a main core mystic truth, or something they all have in common, which is about, and you said surrender, it's that kind of surrendering to this, surrendering to the higher power, to God, and just about alleviating suffering and connecting to something greater than yourself. And that for me was healing, to see that there is something in all the religions that they have in common, and that really it's all like different languages, kind of different ways of connecting with the divine in different cultural contexts. And as I said, that was healing for me, to be able to think of this religion as something that can connect rather than something that can only divide. And it helped me move on, as a rabbi. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up signing on for another 2 years at One Spirit in their inter-spiritual counseling program, which is to learn to be a spiritual counselor or director, it's also called. And I went into this mainly thinking that I'm going to use it in my mikvah work, whereas I had studied a lot of Talmud and a lot of Jewish law, but I never studied how to really sit with a person. I was doing it all on intuition, but I had never been trained in that way. And so this was an amazing, also another 2 years with a lot of very serious inner work. And this is when I was exposed to this thing called dream work, which there's a lot of dreams in the book.
Right. That was going to be my next question, because it's sort of the organizing principle of the book.
So I'm gonna. Mm-hmm. So dreams are the organizing principle of the book, and it was amazing work for me. I had never really thought much about my dreams before, and one of the presenters in this program that I went to, Judith Rosenbaum, who's she's in the book a lot. She came in and she presented this form of work that she does with dreams to help you understand your dreams. And I was just blown away by it. And she then invited people and I was doing the program on Zoom, and she invited people who had dreams that they wanted to work with her to get in touch and do it on Zoom. And that night I had this amazing mikveh dream, which I guess I'll read. A lot of my dreams have water and mikveh, major theme in my dreams. And I ended up studying with her on this during those 2 years. I did a training program with her, and I use dream work in a lot of my work. But in the book, I really use the dreams as a way of doing my own exploration. And the book is not telling people to follow the path that I followed. The idea is really just to inspire people to follow their own path and to listen to their own inner voice and to find their authentic selves. And it's a very intimate, kind of vulnerable book, as you know. Yeah, and a lot of it for me, is also exploring issues of mortality and morbidity and dealing with my own illness. And yeah, and there's and a big theme is this theme of the opening up, broadening And so that is something that comes up in this stream of the mikveh. Should I read that now?
Yeah, so read the dream.
Should I say something about the dream work first?
I don't think we have time to read the whole, to read the process of unpacking the dream, but read the dream so that people can get a sense of the kinds of some of the style of how you organize your stories in the book.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just saw what time it is. And so what I will say then about the dream work is just that the way it works is that every element of the dream is a part of yourself and of your unconscious. And so what you do when you work a dream, and any of you can get in touch with me and you can do the work with me. When you work a dream is you become the different elements of the dream, you embody them and you speak from them. And amazing, amazing things come out in this work. It's just absolutely incredible. So, I mean, this is the dream. It's hard to understand. I mean, maybe I'll just tell you about it afterward. Okay, I am the officiating rabbi at a ceremony at Mikveh Shmaya. It is the conversion of a baby long awaited. Her two fathers are escorting her behind me to the mikveh with a large group of beaming, excited family and friends. The grandmothers are carrying the baby like a precious family heirloom. This is a grandchild that they thought they would never have. I sense their mix of fear and pride. They want to do what it takes to make this baby, born to a surrogate non-Jewish mother, a Jewish child. They want to support their sons in this brave effort to create a shared family, to be a link in the chain of passing on Jewish tradition to future generations. But they're nervous and they have a right to be. Isn't there a better way to welcome this newborn baby into the Jewish people other than dunking her, head and all, in a cistern of rainwater? We approach the immersion pool, me ahead of the pack. And this is the mikveh, I announce. No need to worry about a thing. The water is warm and clear and clean. I gesture toward the mikveh with an open hand, inviting them to see for themselves. Is there really water in there? One grandfather asks. Of course there is, I say. It's deceptive because we keep the water so clean with this new filter system, but it's in there. And then I look inside the immersion pool. My stomach does a double flip. I blink my eyes and look again. I fear this man is correct. There's no water in the mikveh. I convince the family to get something to eat and come back later, after I refill the mikveh. But when we come back to the mikveh building, water is pouring out of the windows, the door. It's flowing down the path, overflowing into the whole kibbutz. It's flooding the place. People are being lifted and carried away. So that's the dream. And I guess I'll just say very, very quickly, because I won't read the working of it, which I was going to, is just to say that Judith Schaffman, my dream teacher, so she had me become the water and speak as the water. And it was all about, first she asked where I went when I disappeared. And I said that I went back to my source. And then I felt this rush, like coming back to refill the mikveh. And she asked me why I came back. And I said, that I needed to do my work back in the world. And then, but that I needed to do it, not confined to the vessel, to the mikveh vessel, not combined in the, in that enclosed place, but that I needed to be more overflowing and I needed more room. And this was a big learning for me. This working this dream helped me see in myself that I felt like, I needed more room, and that I had this always since I can remember, this more like free spirit that I was trying to fit into the confines of, let's say, Orthodoxy that I grew up with, and fighting against it with, Orthodox feminism. But really what I wanted was this more spaciousness, more freedom. And so it's just one example, but the way this work goes, but yeah, amazing.
Well, it was really interesting in the book to sort of see how you unpack the dreams and how you find the meaning in them. And I really hope people will read it so they can have a better sense of that. And I know you have another book coming out soon on marriage, and you're working on a new novel. So we have stuff to look forward to seeing from you in the future. So hopefully we'll be able to have you back to talk about other projects in the future. So thank you so much, Haviva, for being with us tonight, for sharing so openly about your creative and your spiritual processes, and really, really enjoyed our conversation. And thanks to all of you who have joined us. And I encourage you to check out all the stories of women rabbis at JWA's website. And also we are doing an upcoming online history course in March on the subject of women in the rabbinate, because of course, 2022 is the 50th anniversary of the ordination, the public ordination of women, with Sally Priesand's ordination in 1972. So we're going to be exploring some of the history of women and contemporary stories of Jewish women's leadership, spiritual leadership. And you can sign up on the link, which Emma is going to put in the chat for us in a second. Also on the subject of anniversaries, I want to share with you that March 18th is the 100th anniversary of Bat Mitzvah, and JWA is partnering with SAJ, which is the synagogue where the first Bat Mitzvah took place, on a national Shabbat called Rise Up Bat Mitzvah at 100, along with 18 co-sponsoring organizations across the denominational spectrum. We are calling on communities to do something special on the Shabbat of March 18th and 19th to commemorate this the beginning of this revolution, and we have tons of resources and ideas to support that, from new liturgy to lesson plans to oral history tools, even an Instagram project, a reenactment of a video diary of Judy Kaplan, the first Bat Mitzvah. So you can check that out at batmitzvah100.org. And I hope you will join us next week, same time, same place, for a discussion with two authors of middle grade fiction, Emily Barth Eisler, the author of Aftermath, and Amy Lucido, the author of Recipe for Disaster, who will talk to us about writing books with Jewish content for a young audience. So thank you everyone for being with us. It was wonderful to be together. Until next time, be well and good night. And Haviva, I hope you can now get some sleep finally, even though it's practically morning where you are.
I'll go help make the bagels. Okay. All right.
Enjoy. Thank you so much.